Howdy all. I hope I can shed a little light on this, but I'll try to keep it brief and not go too much into the weeds. And if you want to go in the weeds, just ask me and then...
Go in the weeds.
Happy to go. Okay. So what Diana is referring to was the government center redevelopment. And I won't go into all the reasons that they decided they wanted to have a new office space, whether or not that was necessary. Basically, they had two companies come to them with basically proposals, but they weren't even proposals. They were basically their qualifications. So it was a very loose, non-technical meeting. No, they didn't even have design schematics. And the county picked the local firm to redevelop the center. And the way it was going to be financed was that, you know, these things cost a lot of money. Cost a lot of money up front. And so the original plan was for the private developer to buy the land from the county at a reduced cost. I think it was like $8 a square foot or something. And then the private developer would handle the financing. So they would go to the banks and say, we need, you know, $80 million or whatever it was going to cost. And then the county would lease it for 20 some years, and at the end of the lease they would have paid enough money, they would then get it. So kind of like a rent to own, which if you know anything about rent to own, that is the shittiest way to buy anything. It's just any economic advisor would always tell you, do not rent to own. Yeah. Right? And usually this is like a predatory tactic for low income people, like Aaron's can sue me, I don't care. So that was the original plan. And the LGC looked at this and said, you know, if you finance this yourself, because Brian Eckel, who is the head of this local company, he's in good standing with the local banks, but no one is in better standing with banks than government. Right. They get the highest bond ratings, which means the lowest interest rates, which means they can borrow for much less. And New Hanover County actually brags about this all the time, and they have every right to. They have an incredible bond rating, one of the best in the state, and so they can get a very good deal on borrowing money. So the LGC said, this is financially irresponsible. The county should borrow the money and pay for it directly. And so the private developer can still be involved, can still build the private development part of this, but you're going to save the taxpayers over $20 million if you do this. And the county, really, there's no arguing with the LGC at that point. So the county said, okay. And as evidence, so all right, so why would they go with this original plan? The original plan, why would they spend $20 million more than they needed to? Is because in the act of acting as the financer, in addition to the developer, the private company was going to make some extra money. Now, we don't know how much extra money they were going to make because they never actually did. But it was clear that they were going to make this extra money because in the revised deal, with the county paying it for it directly, the developer ended up paying less for the land. I think I gave you the wrong number originally. I think it was originally like $15 a square foot, and it came down to $8 a square foot. Mm. So they got a deal on the land, and we asked the county, why are we having a fire sale on public land? And Chris Coudray, the county manager, his answer was, and I believe this was verbatim, well, we had to give him something, meaning Brian Eccles, because he got screwed out of this sweet financing deal where they could skim off the top, acting as a financial middleman. Because if you get a loan from a local bank and that bank then turns around and gets a loan from someone else, your local bank gets a piece of that. That's how finance works. Everyone gets rich because everyone takes a little piece off of it. So the developer was going to get some of this financing money. The LGC said you can't do that. And so the end result was actually a better deal for everyone. Now again, you could debate whether or not we needed a new government center, but if you take that as a given, this was a better deal for the taxpayers. And the local developer was still going to get to build on some pretty centrally located land. They still got a pretty good deal on the land itself. They get all the financing and contracting costs. So they're still doing, it's still a job. I mean, you're a construction company, you want to build stuff. They still get to build something. So there were some hurt feelings, I'm sure, but it was basically as close to a win-win as you're going to get when government's spending $90 million for your money. So flash forward a couple years. It's the latest incarnation of Project Race. And as a journalist, I was really surprised to see the exact same financing structure put on the table. This is the same plan they tried to run initially with the government center. So instead of taking out a bond, paying for the construction of the new library and museum itself, the county was going to rent to own, again, the shittiest way to buy anything, was going to rent to own its own library. And this is, it already owns the land. The county owns the land. So we're basically going to give the land to the developer, pay them for the privilege. And the difference between building it themselves and financing it through this developer, who again would make extra money because they're in charge of financing it, was about $20 to $24 million. So that's how much they would like to overspend. Now the question is, again, why would they do that? In this case, it's a bit more clear. The developer has point blank said, we will not build this if we are not in control of the financing. Because that guarantees you're going to get a little bit of cash every year, that's just guaranteed income. And especially if you've got investors or you've just got people who are nervous about undertaking what is admittedly, I know some of you have concerns about this project is not ambitious enough, but for a small local firm, this is an ambitious project. So if you're nervous about that, the added income, the stable guaranteed income of a government body paying you every year, that's comforting from a business point of view. So that's why they wanted to do it. At least that's a good chunk of the reason they wanted to do it. So that brings us up to now, right? So now we're waiting for the LGC to weigh in on whether or not this is a good deal. And you would expect, given almost identical projects, you've got government-owned land, it's getting redeveloped, you've got a developer who wants to be in charge of the financing, there's a cheaper way to build it if the county takes out a bond directly, you would expect the same response. And from some of the communications I've seen with the county and the LGC, what the county is arguing is that, well look, when you shot us down for the government center, what you didn't take into account, what you didn't add into the pros and cons columns, was that this private development is going to generate a lot of income. It's going to generate tax revenue, basically, whether that's sales tax or property tax. And you need to add that to the pro column. So yes, we already spent $24 million. That's a con. That's bad. But a good thing is that we're generating this extra revenue. Okay, that's their argument. Just so you know where we're at. I've talked to a couple of real estate people off the record and said, how would you like to own half of the block of Chestnut and Grace? They were very enthusiastic about that idea. They would love to have that. There was a time when I was a little bit younger, there was a bar there called, on Grace called the Bar a Block Too Far. Because it was just outside the beaten path, and that's no longer the case. You've got Whiskey Tango Foxtrot and Taco Baby there seem to be doing well. Now we're looking at restaurants another block down. The Basics never would have survived 15 years ago, and now it's doing great. And a great place to get brunch. That's my pitch. They didn't pay me to do that, but it is a good place to get brunch. So that's valuable real estate is what I'm saying. And it's unclear whether or not the LGC is super familiar with the ins and outs of downtown Wilmington and what that actually all looks like, or whether that even weighs into their analysis. But I will say that it's fair to say that projects of this size generate tax revenue. They do. River Place generates, and I forget the exact numbers, so I'm ballparking it here. I think it's $500,000 a year between the county and the city in property taxes.
River Place?
River Place. It's the big ugly, I shouldn't say ugly, it's the big aesthetically questionable stucco building that it's a $40 million parking lot that the people of Wilmington paid for. Another story for another time. But a cautionary tale for public-private projects, to be sure. And all right, so here's the bottom line, is that we don't know what the LGC is going to do. I have had a couple conversations with Frank Lester and Dale Falwell about this. Dale and I don't agree on a lot of things. We do agree that wasting public money is a bad idea. Wasting public money, and it's an unforced error, is even worse. So it's really up to them. They've said that they would come back with a decision that will review this project sometime in 2022, which is a really, that's a huge win in 2022. So when I put the screws to Frank, he said hopefully first half of 2022. So that's what I know about that. I'm happy to answer any questions if you've got. Yes?
So who are the two names, Frank? What is your position?
Frank Lester, I believe, is a deputy. I'm not sure. Harper might know better than me, actually. And Dale Falwell is the actual treasurer. North Carolina.
Oh, okay.
And so the LGC operates under the treasurer's office.
Okay, I just didn't know this. So what is the workaround that Mike Lee, what is that?
Glad you brought that up, yeah. So I said this wasn't convoluted enough. There is a state law that specifically deals with the redevelopment of this particular block. So it's not vague, but like, well, maybe it's that, maybe it's not. It's definitely that block. That's what it's talking. It's written out in the statute, and it basically says, you know, development on this block is exempt from this other statute. So you got to go find the other statute, pull that up, and then there's the third statute says, you know, because well, you don't have to do some of these things. But if you follow all the way down the rabbit hole, one of the things it says is that it is not subject to LGC approval.
What?
Yeah, that's what I said. Actually, I said a little bit more than that, but you get it. So we called Mike Lee and asked him. And by the way, Mike Lee is also representing the developer now.
Yes, of course.
Because he's the guy you go to. Is it possible this is coincidental? Yes, it is.
No way.
I'm just saying, for the record, it's possible that's coincidence. When Mike Lee helped get this bill passed, so I asked him, like, why did you do this? And he said, well, the county asked us to do that. And that is, to be fair, something local delegations do. You know, for example, back in the either 80s or 90s, Wrightsville Beach got an exemption to state law that allows them to use their parking money to lower their tax rate. That's why Wrightsville Beach's property taxes rates are lower than y'all's, unless you live in Wrightsville Beach, because they can use that money from the parking fund to basically put in their general fund and push property taxes down. That would be illegal anywhere else. Later, Carolina Beach and Cary Beach got in on the action too. They're actually being sued right now for that under the laws that that's unconstitutional. But in general, when local governments ask their state senators and representatives to go help them get a bill passed, they do it. So there is a possible non-nefarious answer to this. Obviously, what you're wondering is, so are they just going to get out from under the LGC? Are they going to be able to duck out from it? So we asked Dale Falwell, who said that he was not aware of any statute that would allow a government project like this to get out from under the LGC. And he said if there is, then they could take him to court. Because that's his job. From his point of view, his job is to save people money from being wasted, and he said, I would defend that rule very vigorously, I believe was his words. So that's one answer. And of course, we asked the county. We said, look, we're not trying to be jerks, but you guys specifically had a bill passed that exempts this project from LGC oversight. And Chris Coujay's words, he swore on a stack of Bibles that they would run this by the LGC. That is absolutely part of their plan, according to him. So there are two possibilities. One, there are other things in the statute that this bill was designed to deal with. By the way, there's other things in the statute it gets out from under, including requirements for minority contracting and stuff like that. It's a whole other can of worms. But basically, there's other things they might have wanted to be dealing with, and they could have unintentionally included this thing about the LGC. That is a possibility. We have seen the county make blunders like that before. And also, state statutes are confusing, and it's possible they just didn't go through it. That is possible. Harper.
What is the city's position on this project?
So, two things on that. One, a couple months ago, 4 or 5 months ago, I interviewed Bill Sappho and asked him about how he felt about this project, because the county had said they're going to commit, 5% to workforce and affordable housing, which is just don't even do it. It's like if someone came to me and said, hey Ben, you've been working your butt off, we're going to give you a 0.5% raise. I was just like, don't even bother. Just, why? So, 5% of 100 units is 5 units, 5% of 200 units is 10 units. They did the same deal with the government center. So Sappho said he would, if it was up to him, he would have liked to see 30% affordable units. And he claims that's what they're going to ask for with the gateway projects with East-West Partners. Again, that's on record. He said it, we recorded it, so we'll see. Yes?
Sappho also put out an email. In fact, he answered Joanne Sylvia's email saying he personally is against this project, and the library and the museum should stay where they are.
I think he is beginning to lean that way. I don't know how I haven't polled everyone on council.
Yeah, yeah, he's the only one that's really gone on record of the council or even of the candidates, except for,
Yeah.
I mean, Harper's the mayor, and Harper's been responsible to us since the beginning. He helped pay for the signs, he got signs, he's attended both meetings, so Harper's okay, but Sappho has signs that he had his picture taken in, and he's also against it moving. But none of the other council members have said anything, and I have copied them on everything that I copy all the rest of you on.
Yeah.
And I apologize for being so much. but-
I think one thing that was interesting, just real quick, because I don't want to forget this, is that the county, when it wrote its MOU with the developer, did, without asking the city, just include the city, and said that
Wow.
the includee would rent. It'd be like if I rented a house and said, oh, and Rebecca's going to get a third of the rent, and didn't ask Rebecca about this, and you would be like, man, what the fuck, dude, you knew it all. So the city, there was some attention at the very least from that. And then the county kind of backtracked and said, well, if the city doesn't want to have space there, then they don't have to. But it's just a weird freaking thing
You said that the city was going to
Yeah.
75,000 square feet.
it wasn't a little ask. That's a lot. If you've ever seen a 75,000 square foot office, it looks like the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. All right, other questions?
So just to clarify on that, the email did say he didn't feel that the city had any power
No, they don't.
or jurisdiction at all. Is that true?
That is true, yeah. I mean, the only jurisdiction they would have over this, I think, would be the technical review committee. They could, but as long as the building is up to code and then meets the current land use that the city has, I don't, I mean, obviously, that's one answer. The other answer is that they are influential public people who could weigh in on this.
Just so my position is clear, I don't get political, but I would do everything in my power to stop this project.
So that's about the long and short of what I've been looking at this. So if you guys have any other questions, by all means. Also, Diana has my email, so you can always reach me. Yes,
LGC, say, what's that called again?
the
What's-
local
Local government commission?
commission, yeah. I have acronym soup in my head, but yes.
And they answer to the Department of Treasury.
Yes, they're directly under the Department of the Treasury. Or they're under the treasurer. So Dale Falwell's the guy. And he actually, there's 100 counties, and hundreds and hundreds of cities and towns and villages. And the LGC reviews projects all across the state. Dale Falwell's probably not familiar with all of them. He is familiar with this one. He was familiar with the government center.
The other thing I'm trying to do, I wrote to the LGC, but one of the things that should involve the city, even though they don't have a vote, unfortunately, but it's going to impact the city, is the loss of the Bourse building is going to be, according to Travis Gilbert, is I'm not going to say this correct, so if you can say it correctly, jump in there, but whenever we lose a building, the city lose a building on the National Historic Register, it makes smaller the area that we have in the city. And so it will impact the city because they've already said it's not feasible, which means it'll cost too much money to save the Woods building. And I met with Zappo and Hayes, and she mentioned to me about the museum, that the armory that's inside the museum is an impediment to changing the museum arena. So I don't believe they're going to save the museum if they don't save this. I think that the museum building will be sold also. And I think that, I'm just negative Nelly here, but I have a feeling that if this goes through, there's no way they're going to save that property up there. It's a block away from the soda pop district. They have more property up there than, they have the building, they have the parking lot, and they have the parking lot across the street that they could all sell. And I think it's a slippery slope if we let them, and this is Travis Gilbert's thing too, it's a slippery slope to let them get away with getting rid of the National Historic Building.
Makes sense.
So that will impact the city.
That is true, and again, you know, as far as, this is nothing like a rezoning where it's an up and down vote, but to your point, you know, even if it didn't, hypothetically, even if it didn't impact the National Registry, just because it's a thing in downtown Wilmington, they would have every right as public officials to say, I'm in favor of this, I'm against this, I think this should be tweaked. As far as the old Cape Fear Museum building goes, that is probably going to be more valuable real estate in 10 years than it is now, to say the least. Unless something radically goes wrong with the development of Wilmington, but all signs point to bust, or boom, not bust. Any other questions?
How much of a done deal is this, really?
If I were to bet, I would say it's a pretty good shot that this is done. It seems like there would be some shooting down the county once to make a point when leading up to an election for Dale Falwell. Seems like a good political move, and it seems like there would be, you know, a spotlight on that. It's interesting when you watch the way governments deal with each other over a long period of time. You know, once is surprising, twice would be really surprising. And also, there was a way through the first time. So with the government center redevelopment, like I said, it ended up in an okay place. The developer still got to build, or is in the process right now of building what I'm sure is a very lucrative project. Not as lucrative as it could have been, but a lucrative project. And the county still gets its brand new government center. So pretty much everyone won. So it wasn't like the LGC came down and just canceled Christmas completely. Whereas this time, the developer has really just said, we will invoke the nuclear option.
What if we got a better developer that would give us a better deal to, like, you know?
I mean, that is, I don't know how you would, as a member of the public, interject that into the county's process, because they seem fairly hell-bent on doing this way. But I think...
Another question.
Yeah.
Okay, this is like, Rebecca would be a little radical maybe, but it appears to me that we have people around who are okay with creating opportunities for private growth at the expense of the public and selling our assets to people who are going to capitalize back off of us. So why can't we just sue them?
Anyone can sue anyone.
Like, shouldn't we be suing them?
I mean, the city
If
of
we-
Wilmington could do a cease and desist. I mean, there's, I don't know, it would be a race between the two slowest bureaucratic processes on the face of the earth, which is the North Carolina Civil Court and development agreements. But you could, I have not seen anything that would prevent you from doing it. You have to show standing in court, but, you know, I've heard arguments for that. I will say, you know, it took me a while to wrap my head around some of the concerns around this project, other than the financing side of it. But I will say, I talked to some friends who are urban planners in other cities, and it does seem like a unicorn to have an entire city block in the downtown area as essentially a blank canvas. So these aren't elected officials, these are urban planners, but when I told them about it, they were like, oh, we could do so much cool stuff. And then I told them what they were doing, and they're like, oh, that's okay. They didn't seem super blown away by it.
I have two questions. The first is, did the developer bring this project to the county, or did the county initiate with the developer? That's
That's a good
the
question.
first one.
Yeah, I'll never be able to give you a 100% answer. It seems like following what appeared to be the success of River Place, the county got the development bug and wanted to do this, because the original plans that we heard about didn't involve any particular developer, and in fact involved a much different skyline than the one we're seeing now, where like there were multiple options. I think there was 3 or 4 options they rolled out the first time, including like up to a 15-story mixed-use building. And it seems the current iteration is very much the vision of the developer. I don't see too, I mean, again, the county commissioners aren't architects, so they're not driving that bus.
I was just wondering if it was a boondoggle like the toll bridge, where the developer brought the idea of the toll bridge. My second question has to do with the media.
Are there any more questions for Ben?
I have one more.
Sure.
Which commissioners are pro the project? Because I need to know who not to vote.
I think they're all essentially
All of them.
for it, and I think, you know, and I've spoken with each of them about it,
And they have varying levels of, you know, nuanced opinion on it. Some are just, oh, let's just do it. And some, I think, have, you know, some heartburn, but are still going to do it. I think from their point of view, this is a win-win. Because they're looking at boxes that they're checking. They're saying, we get a new library, check. Okay, we get you know, we solve some of the storage problems at the Cape Fear Museum, check. We spur public to private development, because they don't all agree on a lot, but they're all neoliberals, right? Not one of them disagrees with the basic tenet that, you know, part of the government's job is to help the private sector do better. So they all agree on those sort of core principles, and they might disagree over, you know, do we save this building, do we not save that building, do we put the park on the east side or the west side? But at the most foundational level is, you know, is this a good idea? I think they all think yes.
Can't they just get like grant funding to make things better? That wouldn't involve us selling public assets?
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I've seen grant projects. I mean, also, I mean, collectively, the governments of the Tri-County area are sitting on over $1 billion. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, the county has $350 million in cash. I'm not talking about the community endowment fund. I'm talking about like in a bank account. They are going to invest it at some point, but that's a lot of money. And again, and they also can borrow money, and they do borrow money. So I think some people would be happy. Some people I've talked to would be happier if they just sold the private land and said, do whatever you want with it, and then spent $90 million on the best possible library and museum. But at this point, I think they are just digging in whenever they get criticism. I see their faces screw up when I bring it up.